We live in a culture that works so hard to try and define who we are. It's easy to be swept away by all of the labels, roles, and identities that the world attaches to us. But what happens when circumstances change the world's definitions of who we think we are? I had the opportunity to sit down with Nancy Jantz as she graciously shared a part of her own identity story.
Growing up, I always loved art, and I had teachers who I really admired who were art teachers, and so that made me decide that I really wanted to be an art teacher. And I thought I had enough talent. So going through school, I took art classes all through high school, and then when I went to Bowling Green State University in Ohio, I majored in art education, so that I could become an art teacher. I graduated from college, and that's when I went into teaching. And at the same time, I ended up getting married that same year. Started teaching in September. Well, that lasted for 2 years, and I decided I wasn't meant to be a teacher. I loved art, but I didn't have the gift of teaching. I liked the process of doing art, and I liked to see the reaction of people who loved seeing art. And so that ended my teaching career. Then I became pregnant with my first daughter, Sherry. Had a wonderful 2 years with her and decided we really would like another child, and then I had Jill. And it was after that, maybe about 2.5 years after that, that Sherry started showing signs that some things just weren't quite right. She would start falling. She would start holding her books very, very close to her face. And we thought, well, this poor little girl, she needs glasses like her mom. We found out that it was something more than just being farsighted or nearsighted, whatever that is. Sherry was first diagnosed with developmental retardation, which was hard for us to understand because she was so bright. She knew her alphabet and she could spell words, not just say them, she could spell words. She was extremely bright, loved books, but then she would start forgetting things that she once knew. So it was at that time that my youngest daughter, Jill, started crying. And at the same time, she would have fits of laughing, which was really fun. It was cute, but that wasn't normal. So we started with the Cleveland Clinic, and they said, well, we need to find out what is wrong with Sherry before we can diagnose what's wrong with Jill. And I thought, oh my goodness, what's going on? What's happening? It took many weeks for even the Cleveland Clinic to find out what was wrong with Sherry, and it ended up being a brain biopsy to actually make a diagnosis. At age 6, Sherry was finally diagnosed with Batten's disease, and that was from the Cleveland Clinic. Once Sherry was diagnosed with Batten's disease, they were able to determine with a blood test for Jill that she also had the same thing. And Batten's disease is a regressive disease that affects the brain, so that the brain basically just deteriorates. So all the skills that they had once learned, they no longer could do and didn't know how to do them. So they regressed. With juvenile Batten's disease, we knew that it was terminal and that Sherry and Jill had maybe a few years to live, but we didn't know, and they didn't know either. So as they regressed, I would take one day at a time, trying to figure out, okay, they can't eat solid foods now, so we went to baby foods. They could not even eat baby foods anymore, so I learned how to put in nasogastric tubes. So they were tube fed for many years. I had them from walking to crawling to just being able to sit in beanbag chairs. And finally they were both in, I had hospital beds set up in my dining room and lived the rest of their life in hospital beds until their death in 1981. And that was, so they were in bed for a good 5 years. During those many years, I became, in essence, a nurse. The blessing, I guess, was that they weren't aware of what was happening to them. Part of Batten's disease is that the eyes deteriorate, so that they were both blind. I don't know about their hearing, but they did not respond to my voice or anybody's voice. But I always had a radio or music going so that they were never felt alone. Part of what got me through all of this is having a support group of my family and friends in the neighborhood. I had 3 young girls who were in their teens who would come over, and they would just be around Sherry and Jill. They would help with the tube feedings so that they were learning. And one of the great things that happened is that all 3 of them became nurses. After they graduated, they became nurses. Church wasn't a part of our life back then. There was no time. I couldn't leave. I did have a nurse who came during the week sometimes, so I could get out. I knew that Father God was with me, and I prayed. For a good 7 years, my role became a nurse to Sherry and Jill. Art went by the wayside, but I knew that one day I would get it back. But Sherry and Jill were the priority, and I gave them the best years I could for them. After Sherry and Jill died, I don't want to say that it was a relief, but for them, I think it was a release of the pain. I don't know if they were in pain. I don't know that for sure. But for me, it was a release for them, a relief for me that they were no longer in pain. After those 7 years and after their death, I had to say, well, who am I now? I'm not their mother, but who am I? What do I do now? I was led back to the field of art and to advertising, which I worked at for 13 years. While working in the advertising business, that's when I met my second husband, Chuck. He was ready to retire, so that's when we decided to come down to Florida, Jacksonville specifically. And it was at that time that I was introduced to Crossroad Church, my church home.
There is a Bible verse in Psalm 68 that says that God sets the lonely in families. When she was invited to Crossroad Church, as is the story for so many, a family is just what Nancy found waiting for her. Though no one will ever take the place of her 2 girls in Nancy's heart, God's plan for her life led her to a place where she was wanted and needed as a surrogate mother, grandmother, sister, and friend. Nancy's time in Jacksonville has been spent using her gift for making the mundane magnificent, especially for children and families. She has painted murals throughout pediatric specialty clinics, autism centers, and hospitals, to name a few. She shared that she thinks about her days of doctor visits with Sherry and Jill and how much more tolerable the experiences would have been had the atmosphere been more uplifting. She's also donated her time and talent to join forces with the Stellar Vacation Bible School crew, making the sets for the children truly magical year after year.
There's a special place in my heart for doing artwork at hospitals and schools and anywhere that's involved with children. I just love to see the smiles on their faces, and that gives me great joy. Father God gave me the talent to make the world a little more beautiful for them. As I'm becoming more comfortable in my Christian faith, I'm becoming more comfortable with who God says I am. and not what the world says I should be.
I am profoundly inspired by Nancy's outlook on life, despite the challenges her heart has faced. Her que sera faith and peace seem to come from knowing the truth that above any role the world calls us to play, our Father in heaven created each of us as His own masterpiece, fully equipped from the beginning and throughout our whole lives with the most important identity of all, to simply be His beloved child.